I'm a senior citizen who's partly disabled, and in the middle of the COVID crisis, I contacted Verizon because my cell phone had dropped and cracked the screen. It took 2 weeks to reach Verizon. They referred me to the insurance company. The insurance company put me through a long set of processes and then wanted to charge me $200. And they gave me all sorts of bogus answers. And when you look at it, they will never honor that $30 price that they're giving you. You will always pay $200. It's a setup. So I had started my phone service with Verizon in January. And as part of that, I purchased their insurance. And the insurance offered support, but it also offered screen repair at $30, which I thought was reasonable. And let's face it, you're likely to break your screen. So my screen broke. I happen to be a senior citizen and in one of the COVID hotspots, and I have some mobility issues. So I needed to get my phone taken care of quickly. I started calling Verizon, and it took 2 weeks before I even got through, but then they said to call Asurion. I called them. The process was overly complicated. They had me enter the same information again and again and again on a phone line, an email, in text form, and they even wanted it faxed. And the total content was maybe a half a page, but, all right. And I get that, and finally I'm getting to the very, very last stage of the process, and a price pops up of $200. I go back to them, and I just said, wait a minute, this is $29.99. Now, I'm having trouble reaching them to begin with, so I reached them on Twitter. And on Twitter, they said, well, if we don't have the parts and locally, we have to replace the whole phone. And I'm going, well, that doesn't seem fair that if you don't have the parts here, that I have to suffer. And they go, well, that's what's written in the contract. It just still didn't seem right, especially since I had no way of knowing that. They could just say anything, and it was the computer that told me the price. It wasn't as if it had to go to anyone. So I went back to them again, and I said, this isn't making any sense. And I was told that they will fix the screen if there are no other problems with the phone. And I had told them in the initial questionnaire that I couldn't dial. So they said they were going to have to replace the whole phone. Yet the problem was within the screen. So they are basically saying that they will honor that $30 price if the phone works completely and you have a broken screen, which is nearly impossible. So they've set up a condition that they're not fulfilling there. And it was, when I look at it and I went through all the contract, they've basically said, this is what we're offering. And then in a way, only due to their interpretation of certain things, they're not going to honor it. So that's the deal. Now, I found another way of taking care of things myself and did not do that because I wasn't going to pay $200. Now, by the way, I'm a senior citizen in a COVID hotspot. I needed something to dial 911 if I got sick. I needed the ability to respond to calls if I made a call to the grocery or the doctor. So I was pretty, in between a rock and a hard place. I had no ability to even call an ambulance if I got sick. And, I don't know if they did this all over or what, but it certainly sounds like profiteering. And it also sounds to me like they never intended to provide that service. Well, what it sounded like was that they have places where they do the work for just replacing the screen, but if they were short-staffed, that I was going to have to pay more for their inability to do that. But then they're giving me another story too about how, when you look at the conditions, it is unless you're the very rare person who can break your phone screen and the phone works perfectly well, you're going to pay the extra money. So I don't believe they ever intended to do it. And even when I look back at the questionnaires in the computer form, they ask two questions like, is everything in the phone functioning? Now, even if it did seem that way, most people would say no, because you're worried something else. You don't know. So I would love to see someone try to get the figures out of them and say how many of those that they really have served, how many people got that price. I would bet not very many.
And tell me, how much time did you spend trying to solve the problem with them, trying to contact them, to get answers?
So because it was both Verizon, where I was initially calling, rather than Asurion, I spent 2 weeks trying to reach them. One point I spent 10 hours on hold. And, I would spend time on hold. So, and then eventually when I, reached them through Twitter, I would be, because that was the only way I could reach them. And I would contact them on Twitter, Verizon, and say, I'm having the problem. I have a broken phone. I'm a senior who's disabled in a COVID hotspot. I need to take care of this quickly. I've got this insurance. And they would respond back, call the 800 number. And I'm going, what part of the words broken phone don't you understand? I was, and this happened multiple times, but they wouldn't tell me that until maybe 5 hours later, 6 hours later. So I would have to sit here and stare at the screen for the entire time to know if they were going to get back to me. One point they just said, how can we help you? And I saw there was a live person. I explained it, hit enter, gone. It's like this, ask us a question. Bye-bye.
Tell me, please, what steps should they take to satisfy you?
Well, there's two things, and one on Verizon's end and one on Asurion's end. Asurion needs to streamline their process. There's no reason for all of that, to sit there to print out what you've done. There's electronic signature laws. They can accept that. So they need to streamline the process. Secondly, I believe that their system is designed to automatically charge you $200 no matter what. The question should be, is anything broken not related to the screen? That would be legitimate. But they just asked, was anything else wrong with the phone? And then they made the decision that was somewhere else in the phone, which you can't do until you've got a technician who looks at it. So they were automatically having me diagnose the phone before I gave it to them and automatically giving them a higher price. But of course, to say that nothing was wrong with the phone, they could have used that as, a way out of doing anything because I didn't tell them the truth. So, so they need to streamline it. And number two, they need to make sure that they honor the price, that they only change the price to $200 if they discover there is something else wrong with the phone. That's legitimate. That's, basically what they're saying. Secondly, they should not hold consumers responsible for their lack of planning. And also and raise the price based upon who knows, who can say if they have the parts or not. And Verizon says, oh, this is not our problem. This is Asurion's. I'm certain that during contract negotiations, you worked out the process, you worked out the agreements, you worked out all of this information there. So you're paying them for this. So you are responsible. Verizon should take responsibility for that. And say, because I guarantee you they have gotten phone calls when people are unhappy. They know about it. So they need to take that responsibility and consider that it's their responsibility to see that it happens. They also need to make sure that during some emergency, that they have ways for people to reach them who do not have a phone. Because your options were an online chat that led you into phone, or the phone line. And what they needed to do was have an email form, perhaps, or something like that. They provided no email. They provided no other way to reach them, which is why I had to go to Twitter. And there in Twitter, when you left a comment, they would wait several hours before you would get back. And that would mean that you would have to sit there and stay at that computer watching for someone to type for hours. You have no idea if there's even anyone there. And on top of that, the people who answer that need to read the questions, read the statements. Not a single one addressed what I said. And I would tell you that I probably texted with about a dozen people there. And not a single person said, this is what needs to be done. I was even giving them options. Should I do this, that, the other thing? Later, after I became a little calmer and a little less afraid, I realized that I had the ability to FaceTime them. Just never thought of that. But, it was just designed. So what they had was a system that the only people who got through were the people willing to wait online for hours until they got someone. And it did not, therefore, allow calls to come in or issues to reach them in the order in which they came. Because I'm sure there were people who had the ability to hand the phone to a child or something and say, call me if anyone comes here, and wait 4 hours and then come back. But it was only set up that the only way to get through them was to be willing to be on the phone for hours. And you didn't know. So, I think the two of them are responsible for the insurance policy, how it's implemented, and how it's fulfilled. And the Verizon is responsible for making sure that calls get through to them, or customers get through to them. At the very least, a web form, if not provide an email address.
Do you have some final message for all the customers that are going to see this video?
Well, I would say that if you decide to choose Verizon, you're going to see they're going to ask you to pay another $15 a month for this insurance. But the insurance is not going to pay out. You're not going to pay what you said. So you need to go and perhaps either look, if you want that insurance, look elsewhere and read the details of the contract. But how do you know how someone interprets the word cracked? Which is basically what they were doing.